Howdy, gang. Give us 1 second. We'll bring in the Twitch crew and start recording on that end. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and it is the 28th of September, which is shocking and horrifying. Hope everybody's doing all right. I don't think I have anything in particular to talk about before we get into questions. I do have a ton of work to do tonight, as is usually the case, more than usual this evening. I've got a lot of work still left to do on getting in notes for episode 5 of Empire of Terror. It's going to take a couple hours, and I still have to get up a right angle that I should have gotten to last night. So I've got a bit to do. For those of you who didn't catch the news earlier, on Monday's show, I think it was Monday's show, John is out. This John here is out of the country till the end of October, so that'll be happening as soon as he gets back. And the only other person I'm really ready for is Gary Sinise, and he is leaving Los Angeles tomorrow as we record this, and he's not coming back. So that's sad news for us. Good news for Franklin, Tennessee, I think. So I'm expecting, obviously, give him a week or two to settle down. So I'm hoping to get Gary in by October 10th or 15th or something like that. And then John a couple weeks after that. And once we get those two guys on the rails, then we can start really opening it up. I had a chance to talk to Kelly Carlson. She's definitely in. I talked to her husband, who's, I don't know what his current status is, but certainly was an active SEAL team member for a number of years. And he's agreed to talk on camera, and we just keep adding names. So it's pretty cool. Roadrunner asks if I'm the last conservative in LA. I suspect not, although no one else comes to mind. So yeah, there it is. And he'll be great out there. The not going to go into it again. We talked about enough. The present, the little gift that we got for Gary is terrific, and Gary has the Gary Sinise Foundation, and out here in Los Angeles, it was several floors. He does so much good work, and I get the feeling that this little present on behalf of the members at BillWhittle.com is going to take pride of place in that foundation, because it is essentially a little museum with pretty much everything he's ever done. He's got entire walls of challenge coins, and he's built so many houses for so many veterans, and that foundation's just working all the time. Lieutenant Dan Band is constantly playing, and he's just a super guy. So I think he'll be very moved when he sees what the members got for him, and one member in particular, and I'm looking forward to getting that reaction on camera and showing it to all of you. But that'll be probably about 2 weeks from today, so I'm a little behind schedule on this, but kind of circumstances beyond my control, I'm sorry to say. I was thinking about something for Mike Rowe, and I'm looking into, there was a custom, I actually don't know why it was a custom, ended just as I was a baby, but they used to bronze your baby shoes. I guess it was to show that you once had very, very tiny feet. But that was a thing, bronze baby shoes. So we're looking into seeing whether we can get a pair of work gloves bronzed, or ideally, plated in a gold-like substance. Pair of work gloves, and we can give him the Golden Gloves Award for the little man. It's going to be challenging to think of something for everybody, especially something that doesn't cost more money than than the membership it brings in. But I think the M60 would be really good for Adam Baldwin. So we've got a bunch of things kind of lined up. I'm not particularly clear-minded today, and I haven't been for a while. I am. Natasha's feeling it too. We're both just dealing with this. It's not just brain fog. It's just a physical and mental lethargy, and the supplements that my friend and his wife Phil and Bobby recommended helped a lot. But I think I just, I want to start the show with a big pity party. But just in way of explanation, I don't believe I've ever been under this kind of stress for this length of time in my life, and it's not at all fun. So, I guess it's just kind of getting to me for a while. Lady Hawk says maybe long COVID. It could be, I guess. Certainly feel different after COVID than I did before. But yeah, it's getting progressively harder to focus, and I suspect it's an axe sharpening issue. But the problem is, I don't I don't have time to sharpen my axe, and which reminds me of a friend Steve's line: "I'm in no condition to exercise." So I am just working on the stuff as fast as I can. And also, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night. We've got 3 cats now, Natasha and I. 2 of them are relatively new. We have a 6-year-old Persian, because she had a lovely Persian, and we got another one. And then we picked up a rescue cat who's turned into a complete bandito. This guy he's like the ultimate teenager. But my other cat, his legal name is Tahoe, but I call him Bean. Everybody calls him Bean. And I've had Bean since 2010, so that's quite a while. And somewhere around about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, when we first got that metal cat, the rescue cat, Spike. Spike was just constantly, doing what cats do, just young cat, just constantly playing with him. And one day I just found him, and Bean was just lost. His pupils were completely wide open, and he was taking these tiny little steps. He was bumping into things, bumping along the wall. I got in the car and shot down to the vet. I was sure we'd lost him, absolutely sure that he'd had a stroke or something. He wasn't in distress. He just didn't have any idea where he was at all. And it was very alarming. I really did not think he was going to come out of that vet's office. But he's diabetic. I've been giving him 2 shots a day for the last 6 years, I suppose. Anyway, the vet said that sometimes cats get, I'd never heard of this before or since, but they can apparently get stressed and they just go into this kind of a trance-like mode. It's really disturbing. So last night this happened, just as I was going to bed. I was trying to get to bed early, and I did, for once. And just as I was going to bed, I saw him wandering around there, and I thought, okay, he's had this episode now probably 5 times since I've had him. And after the first time, it got a lot easier. It was just a question of, okay, Bill, this is disturbing, but just, the vet says it's confusion or something, and so Side Wings Raging says he's catatonic. I don't know why I didn't think of that. That's actually extremely clever. Yes, he's catatonic. It's exactly what he is, and he doesn't know where he is. And so I went to bed last night, like I said, real early for me anyway, somewhere around 10 or something, and he was still in this state, but he's always recovered, so I thought, okay, no worries. And I woke up a couple hours later, just wanted to see how he's doing, and I couldn't find him. And I looked under the bed, and I looked all around the house, and I would hear kind of these scratching noises, and I'd look down and I'd see Spike, and I was pretty sure it was Spike. And so I just kept getting around. I'd assumed he crawled into a closet or something like that. Anyway, after about 4 or 5 hours of this, I looked under the bed again, and he wasn't pinned exactly, but there was like a triangular cross brace, and he'd put his 2 front paws over it, but he couldn't get his back paws out, largely because he didn't know where he was. And so he'd been down there for about 3 hours, and he was pretty stressed. And I just, stayed up with him for, I don't know, another 3 or 4 hours, so I'd get to sleep until, 5 or 6 or something, I guess. He's better now. He's just, He's just an older cat, but he just means the world to me, that boy. And the cat Pismo we lost a few years ago, those two guys have been with me for a long time. So anyway, he was down there stressed for a long time, so it took him quite a while to recover. He seems to be fine today. And so I just get to the point where just have to ride it out, man. You know, it's just like you know, like I said, the first time I was just completely shattered. But the second time, yeah, and the third time it's been easier. But he was under that bed. He wasn't, like I say, he wasn't trapped. It wasn't like he was having trouble breathing, but he was certainly not comfortable. So that's a long time for him to be that way. Eric Blake says here, it's very interesting that you're a cat guy, Bill. I don't know why, but somehow always had you for a dog person for some reason. Maybe because steely-eyed missilemen typically have a dog. I don't know. I am a dog person. I was a dog person. Grew up with a dog named Spot, who was a awesome sheepdog, and had basically been around dogs my whole life. I actually hated cats, couldn't stand them. Someone gave me, a friend of mine who was working with in Gainesville on the sketch comedy show that I was doing, had a litter of Maine Coons, and he asked me to take one. I said, I'm not going to do it. I can't stand them. And he said, just for the weekend, just for the weekend. So I got him, and they brought me a litter box and some cat food. I put the cat food. He was a little tiny kitten, and he ate the cat food. And then he went in the litter box, and he came over and was just a super cool cat. And I was lying down on the bed that night, and he kind of came up on my chest there. He's a tiny little kitten. And I blinked, and every time I blinked, so I started blinking at him on purpose like this. And so he kept doing that, and then I blinked, and then he scratched my cornea, which hurt a lot, especially the next day, because cat's claws are kind of a lot of bacteria on them and stuff like that. So right out the gate, he cost me a couple $100 getting that fixed. But nevertheless, I had Reno forever, and Texas, and a couple years ago, Pismo. Pismo just nearly killed me. But this guy is he's like Bean's my private cat. Natasha says that when I'm not there, he just kind of keeps to himself, and it's hard to. She says even she's having a hard time, petting him and stuff. He just kind of wants to be left alone. Sits there, and as soon as I get back, he just gets a lot friendlier. So anyway, so that kept me up a lot of the night. So I'm going to try and keep this a little brief if I can. But I sure do. I just crazy about that guy. He's just been there for me forever, and he's a good boy. All right, so let me see here. I don't know if there's anything really to mind in terms of politics. So maybe the thing to do is just kind of jump into the questions. If I can knock them all down on billwhittle.com, we'll see how much time we have left. I might even get to Facebook. I will say for a certain fact, if I get through all the billwhittle.com and the Facebook questions, I'm going home early, but that doesn't seem likely. And I've talked to friends since the subject came up. I just wrapped this up. One of my friends, one of our members, is especially close to a dog of his. Was a service dog, and they were just like that for 25, 30 years. And I heard the news that his dog had passed away, and he was just obliterated by this. And so I'll just give those of you out there the advice I gave him and the advice I gave me, and that is that horrible day. Thousands of great days and one really, really bad day. But I always just try to think of that as that's what they cost. That's what they cost. If you didn't want to feel the pain, you could have gone without that pet. And how would your life have been if you didn't have that pet? It's just what they cost. And the real Catherine cases, we see them again. I actually genuinely believe that we do. And the The reason I believe that we do is because it would be, if I was designing the universe, that's what I would do. And I'm not that bright. So we won't know until we know. And then when we know, we won't be able to tell anybody. That's how planet Earth works. Okay, so let's see what we've got going over here at the world's coolest website. I talked about, while I'm getting this thing teed up here, I had obviously mentioned that the interview show is going to actually do it as if it was, something like a business. So when we interview John or Gary or anybody else, I expect to get, I'm very good at this editing thing. I've done this a lot. Did it for a decade. I expect that we'll get at least 2 and maybe even 3 or 4 different unique segments just off the top of my head. For Gary, I'm sure we'll have a conversation about Lieutenant Dan and another one about Ken Mattingly and maybe another one about him starting Steppenwolf Theater. And I'm going to be able to take highlights from all of those, put them out there to drive members. Members are going to get the interviews, and then the higher level member above that, the 1995, gets the raw footage from start to finish, and the level above that gets to ask questions, which I will try to work in. But I was thinking about this, and I'm wondering what I do about people that maybe don't want to become members or something, and I'm wondering if the members would have a problem if I were to do that as a Patreon benefit at the same level as the membership, just for people who may be not so inclined to get behind a Trump supporting fascist dictator like myself. So in any event, I think that's a real possibility. And somebody had said it'd be nice if you could pay, by the episode, for instance, if you just really wanted to see Gary Sinise, just pay for that. It might be a way to do that. I don't know. But in any event, whatever it is, it can't be terribly labor intensive, because we just don't have the staff for that. But and I mentioned on Monday too, I've been just jumping around forever with the name on this show. Just couldn't get it. I was going to call it In the Moment. That was my original idea. I was going to call it Archetypes. I was going to call it Decoding the Archetypes. I was going to call all kinds of different things. And I really think that I'm going to stay with Spoiler Alert, How to Tell a Story. I think that's what it's going to be called. Spoiler Alert, How to Tell a Story with Bill Whittle and Gary Sinise, How to Tell a Story with Bill Whittle and John Voight. I think that's the way it goes. I was talking with Scott about this on our backstage show, and Scott said, whatever it is, make sure it has the Bill Whittle in the title. And I feel about that the way I felt about BillWhittle.com, which was like, really? We can't come up with anything better than that? But and I said, no, you really need to have it in the title. I said, okay, so how about if we call it Bill Whittle Presents the Bill Whittle Show, hosted by Bill Whittle? How would that be? And I actually liked that a lot. I thought that had a real nice ring to it. All right, here we go. So we're in the comments section here for members only at BillWhittle.com. Let me see. Got Ian Nolan, Eric, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to take most of the night. We'll see. All right, so let's just dig in. And it looks like we have, up first we have Ian Nolan. Bill, I think I've just found something that ties several of the threads together. Good, because I'm looking for that. Why are the political and spiritual spheres so closely lined up? What is the existential crisis of this winter turning? It's the fourth turning thing that I'm actually becoming very interested in. Why does it seem so much more vague and nebulous than previous turnings? That's exactly the word. Does the pandemic tie into all of this? Yes, and on some level, I also thought that 9/11 was 9/11 was early, but 9/11 was kind of I always described 9/11 impact on society as a flip coin that landed on its edge. half of the country took it as, all right, this is it. We're going to war. And the other half of the country essentially said, well, we deserved it. And that was not the side I was on. But I think the pandemic is actually a much better. In fact, I think, Ian, honestly, I cannot tell you how gobsmacked I am, considering all of the thinking that I did on this subject in the last 3 weeks. I can't tell you how gobsmacked I am that it did not occur to me that COVID-19 would be the crisis. I'm just plain flabbergasted that I didn't see anything that obvious. I think it's part of it, yes, and I think and you're about to elaborate, but honestly, that was just plain. How did I miss that? Anyway, thank you. That'll make my speech on Saturday night considerably better. So going on, here's the thought: it's all fifth-generation warfare. The existential conflict of this turning is spiritual warfare, because spiritual warfare is about thoughts and hearts, i.e. information warfare, i.e. fifth-generation warfare. I agree. The pandemic was one of the great battlefronts across which the fight occurred. The turning crisis isn't fought with bullets, lucky us, but a multipolar war for control and advantage entirely via fifth-generation warfare. Ian, that may be the best question and suggestion that I can remember for this show, and that is a high bar to clear, I might add. That is a lot to talk about. That really is genuinely brilliant. Okay, so, wow. This clarifies so much, and I love the way he opens it, but think about a way to tie several of these threads together. I'm like suddenly energized. So, let's just go back to the basics. The theory that is espoused in this book, The Fourth Turning, and seems to be pretty solidly backed up by historical evidence, is that human time moves in cycles. I used to think these cycles were hundreds of years long, but the case that these authors are making is that there is a rhythm to human history, and that rhythm is 80 to 100 years, generally right around 80, 85 years, somewhere in that general neighborhood. And their argument was that is not a coincidence, that 80 years or so is the Romans called the seculum, which is where we get the word secular and non-secular from. Seculum basically meant the human lifespan. And we have 4 seasons to the year, and it's widely considered that a human life has 4 seasons. You get, spring, which is childhood, summer, which is young adulthood into maturity, fall, which is height of your powers and slowly starting to unravel, and then winter is old age and your second childhood and all the rest of it. The argument is that a generation forms every 20 years, and that these generations move as cohorts. And this is one of the reasons why I think there's something to this theory, because nobody I know has ever explained why I'm a boomer and somebody who's a year younger than me is Gen Xer, but that's how it works. And it's also clear to me that boomers have a different opinion of things than Gen Xers or Gen Y or Gen Z or millennials. And so these are, whether we like it or not, these are cohorts is the term. They're bulges that move through the snake of life, and they are pretty clearly delineated. It's not a spectrum from what my dad believed to what a Gen Z person today believes. It's not just a sort of a gradual change. It's like GI generation. I'm not going to go with greatest because the authors don't. So GI generation, silent generation, boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, Gen Z. And the argument that these writers are making is that the generation will have characteristics that repeat itself every seculum, every 80 years, based on where they are, where the generation is relative to a crisis. So they say there's been, in American history, tracks apparently very well, an existential crisis every 80 years in America. So Declaration of independence was 1776, but most of the Revolutionary War was fought in the 1780s. You add 80 years to the 1780s and you get the 1860s. That's a civil war. You add 80 years to the 1860s and that's the 1940s, and that's World War II. You add 80 years to the 1940s, you get the 2020s. And I was thinking, why hasn't anything happened? And then along comes Ian Nolan. It's like, dummy, it's right in front of your face. A freaking pandemic is what happened. It's a crisis. And I'm not saying that crisis is finished yet, mind you. And that's something we're going to unpack here in a minute too. So, this whole theory essentially hinges on the crisis. If there's no crisis, then there's no definition to the generations. The entire idea would be that my dad was GI generation, greatest generation. Now, I never experienced the crisis, but I was in constant direct contact with two people who did experience the crisis, and that was my mom and my dad. My dad was in the U.S. Army and got to Germany in April of '45. He had 3 weeks left in the European War. He was getting ready to go to Japan and get killed over there. But he grew up with the crisis. All of his friends on the back of his Army graduating class, officer graduating class for second lieutenants, they all said, "I expect to go over and get killed dying for my country." So that generation has certain characteristics that are formed from them having living through the crisis, and one of them is that the generation after that is extremely optimistic because their parents went through hell, came through hell, got through the other side of hell, and instilled in you the idea that anything is possible now. Now that this thing is behind us, now we can go to the moon, we can have colonies on Mars, have undersea cities, we can have these all of this stuff that is so deeply ingrained in me because the entire culture was telling us this. We'd beaten the Nazis, we'd beaten the Japanese, we were kind of in this deadlock with the Russians, but the bombs seemed to be keeping them at bay, and I'm sure they thought their bombs were keeping us at bay, and they were. And so we were extremely optimistic. And then these authors also say that opposite the crisis, in other words, if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, on beats 1 and beats 3, there's a crisis on beat 1, and on beat 3 there's what they call an awakening, a spiritual awakening, which they say happened in the 70s, and you think about this end of the 60s and the 70s, and you think, boy, that was not exactly a spiritual awakening because it wasn't a Christian church awakening, but everybody was going through the spiritual movement from biorhythms to huge rebirth and interest in astrology and all of this kind of Woodstocky kind of we're going to use LSD to see God, that kind of thing. So the theory seems to hold up really pretty well and explains a bunch of things. So the reason that their book was called The Fourth Turning is that when they wrote this, which was the very, very end of the 90s, they could tell that the third phase is the unraveling. The fourth phase is the crisis. And even in the late 90s, they say we're clearly in the unraveling. We're heading towards a crisis, which according to their schedule was going to happen in 2020. They've since written a new book called The Fourth Turning is Upon Us or something like that, which I haven't read yet because the first one is just nearly impenetrable. I've gotten through 30% of it, and I have not seen anything new at all. So I'll keep skimming, and then I'll try to read the new one. But let's just say for the sake of the argument that this thing is true. The thing that Ian points out that I think is so interesting is this idea of fifth generational warfare. One of the things that is crystal clear about history is, and I believe I've mentioned this before recently, this adage about how generals are always preparing to fight the last war. And when that's spoken, it's usually spoken as a form of incompetence, like the generals are all arming up to fight the last war when they should be thinking about the next war. But after some reflection, I realized what they're really saying is every general is plugging the hole of the last war. So if the last existential war 80 years ago was facing fleets of battleships hundreds, thousands of Panzer tanks, paratroopers, infantry, submarines, U-boats, all that stuff. If that's what the last crisis was about, then in the interim period, we have prepared to fight that last battle. We built a lot of tanks. We built the best tanks in the world. We built the best Navy in the world. Built the best Air Force in the world. We currently have the best military in the world. Nobody's close to us. We have plugged that hole very, very effectively. And so that's not where the next attack is coming. On a smaller scale, this is my argument for the ownership of personal firearms, specifically certain black rifles that may have tragically disappeared in a boating accident or other kinds of accidents. The fact that this population is armed means that they're not coming after us with arms. We have plugged that hole. We've seen enough people being taken out of their homes and shot or whipped or tortured or whatever, so that the founding fathers understood what tyranny was, and they said, ammo up, folks. And that's kept the country essentially free, well, not essentially, completely free, for 250 years. The invasion of the British in 1812 was just a blip. Pearl Harbor didn't strike the mainland. 9/11 did, and 9/11 succeeded because they used a different weapon than we were prepared for. No one expected that we would turn possible to turn our commercial airline fleet into weapons and bombs, and essentially smart bombs, loaded with thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of aviation fuel, plus a lot of impact momentum. So we got hit where we weren't looking. That's where you're always going to get hit, is where you're not looking. If you're looking where you're looking, they're not going to hit you there. That's just common sense. So, somebody pointed out that Tom Clancy did. Matt Harris said that Clancy did. Well, Clancy was an actual genius in a lot of ways. So, what's next? Well, this is why people listen to punditry, because uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable for humans. Most everybody would rather know whether it's good news or bad news rather than not knowing, in the same way that it's horrible to have a pet die, but it's worse to have one run away. And it's terrible to have a father or a son killed in combat, but it's worse to have them missing in action, because that uncertainty constantly stays with you. That wound never heals. So people want to know what's going to happen. And my job is to look at as much information as I can and try and figure this out. And if all I did was look at military information, then I would be a kind of a I'm a hammer and everything's a nail thing. But I also look at the pop culture, and I look at things like body cam arrest videos, and I look at the political movements, and I take a lot of time looking at the actual character, the moral fiber of millennials and Gen Z. I'm trying to figure out where this next crisis is going to be, and since it's due, it's almost overdue. I can't believe I didn't see it. I don't think COVID was the entire crisis, but I do think COVID was Pearl Harbor of this crisis wave, and I'm still beating myself for not having seen that. But better late than never, I guess. So if I look at what's out there now, and you think, okay, existential crisis to America, people think nuclear war with Russia, nuclear war with China. I don't think there's any chance of that happening. Any chance. Because we plugged that hole 80 years ago. So it's going to come from a different place. Cyber collapse is a possibility. People say EMP pulse. Yes, that's absolutely true. You detonate a few nuclear weapons above America, you pretty much fry the electrical grid, because our electrical grid is so unbelievably vulnerable, because we don't have an actual government that governs and thinks about the future. Because if we did, we'd have much better roads, and we'd have a hardened electrical system with numerous replacement parts for the parts that are likely to cook, like these giant transformers, and we'd have them on site ready to go. That's what a government that spends, just a couple trillions of dollars would do. Forget about 35 trillion or 40 or whatever it is now. I think these are all possibilities. I think the EMP thing is unlikely because in order to launch an EMP attack, you have to have nuclear weapons. You have to have the ability to get it into, at least into suborbit over the United States. And when that happens, we will know before the pulse who did it, and that's an act of war. So for me, the EMP attack on the electrical system falls into sort of an outlier of this kind of World War III thing, which I think is just off the table. It's not something a terrorist group can do. And even if they could acquire the equipment, that missile or missiles that are necessary for the EMP pulse have to be launched from somewhere, and that is as open an act of war as there is. So I don't think it's going to be that. Not entirely sure what the cyber possibility is. The internet is astonishingly resilient. It was designed that way. I suspect that's not it either. So if I look out there now and I say, okay, so what do I see out there that's just really festering? And I believe I mentioned this last week. I think that the next crisis is going to be the abandonment of cities. David Booty says Iran wants to die in order to destroy the great Satan. Well, they've had plenty of chances, Dave, and they could have done any number of things like biological attacks or anything like that. So I know that's what their religion tells them, but it's funny when it comes time to being the first person to walk off the plank, volunteers tend to dry up. In any event, I think the cities are going to implode. I think that's clearly, to me, the crisis that's on our hand. And concurrent with the cities imploding, the southern border is now not a border at all. It's a welcome mat. 10,000 people a day, and more. So what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean? Well, as Ian points out, I think he's right. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of bullets, at least not for most of the members of this audience. I would not be surprised if we see America's cities turn pretty quickly into Escape from New York kind of dystopian nightmares. That's happening already pretty quickly. New York is turning into a lawless gang of street gangs just smashing windows and walking out with whatever they want. That seems pretty obvious to me. It's happening in San Francisco. Los Angeles is not quite as lawless as San Francisco or Portland, but you've just got all of this baggage that these cities have, and all of this debt, and all of this lack of action. And mostly what you have are large numbers of extremely furious people with very small world perspectives. When you look at Baltimore as an example, because of the tremendous books called The Corner and I think it's Homicide. In the 90s, just looking at in the 90s were paradise compared to today, but just looking at the drug culture in Baltimore, inner city Baltimore in the 1990s, you could tell that things were coming apart fast. And the one thing that always struck me, and this is, I think this is a heavy part of what I'm thinking about, is when you look at inner city Baltimore, any one of us would look at this situation and say, well, if I can't change it and it doesn't appear that I can, then I'm getting the hell out of here. And so why doesn't that happen? Why don't the people who are most victimized by this lack of law and order, by these gangs and these murder rates, 8,000 blacks killing each other a year, and all of the other crimes associated with whites and blacks and Hispanics and all the rest, why don't they just leave? Well, you could say, well, they don't have the money to leave, but it's not that. I don't think. I think I say with some confidence, after 3 generations of nothing but dependency bred by welfare checks, they don't know how to live anywhere else. And given the level of education, they don't even know that there's an anywhere else. I can't imagine a situation in a city getting so bad that people leave, but that would be because they shut off because there's no water, no food, or electricity. That's what I think it would take. And that may be coming, I think. But even if I were to hand out plane tickets to people in Baltimore, let's say, and say we're just going to evacuate Baltimore, where do you want to go? I get the feeling that the people that we would be evacuating would pretty much universally say Chicago, New York, Detroit, Atlanta, Dallas, although they'd be in for a surprise in Dallas. And so if it turns out that these cities are heading the way that they're heading and nothing changes, and I don't see this changing, I don't think you're going to vote your way out of this, then we're going to have tens of millions of people in this country. And just for the folks at Media Matters here, let me make crystal clear of this. When I say tens of millions of dysfunctional people, I mean tens of millions of dysfunctional people of all different colors. All of them together are going to have no skills, no perspective. Their education has been so poor. Their entire worldview has been so blinded by these horrific schools that the Democrats have inflicted on them. One of the right angles that I didn't get to post yet talked about just recent news from Baltimore. I mean, like last week, they did tests in the Baltimore school districts, and they found out that of all the students tested, 11.4% of them were proficient in math at their age group. Not excelling in math, proficient in math. Apparently the proficiency is graded on a scale of 1, 2, 3 to 4. So 11% of all of the students in Baltimore are proficient, are scoring a 4. And what's especially interesting is that the other 90% or so are not scoring 1, 2s, and 3s. It's either a 1 or it's a 4. You're either proficient in math or you are completely, absolutely incapable of any sort of mathematical thinking. And I'm pretty sure you can take that across all these other fields. So why is that? Progressives will tell you it's because we're not spending enough money. When I did a firewall on this called The Most Shameful Injustice back for David Horowitz at the Freedom Center, Truth Revolt, the numbers were something like $15,500 per student per year. That's what Baltimore spends on its students. And then it was pointed out by, I think it was Scott or Steve in the right angle. Hang on, Bill, that doesn't mean that $15,000 was spent on them per student. It means that they took the total education budget for Baltimore, divided it by the total number of students, and basically said we're spending $15,000 per student. But that doesn't include the fact that you have to pay teachers and especially administrators. So you'll be pleased to know that the woman who's in charge of the education system for Baltimore, a young, attractive woman of color, is responsible for the schools and the success of the students at Baltimore, and her annual salary is $445,000 per year. That's what she gets for her extraordinary performance. $445,000 per year to get 11% of the students proficient in math, not excelling in math, just able to pass the test. Oh, and Lady Hawk says her son goes to private school. Of course she does, or he does. So what do you do about this? What do you do about this? You going to vote your way out of this? It seems unlikely, although last week we did a right angle. Scott brought a right angle that actually was one of the most hopeful things I've seen in a long time, only because it just proves this very clear theory. He basically said that Mississippi, which had been last in education all across the country since the Civil War or earlier, Mississippi's just been the laughingstock of education in terms of state scores. Well, Mississippi is zooming up through the ranks because somehow or another, nobody really knows how, but somehow or another, Mississippi decided not to graduate people who didn't meet the graduation standards. If you couldn't pass the third grade test, you didn't get to the fourth grade. You had to do third grade over again, as you did back in the olden days when I was young. And it turns out, I hope you're sitting down for this because I know this will come as a great shock to you. It turns out that if you enforce standards, people will rise to the standards. They'll rise to a level to clear the standards. If you don't enforce standards, then they will do the absolute minimum, which is essentially nothing. So what Mississippi did was they realized, oh, okay, teachers don't want to teach the same student again, and especially large numbers of the same students again. Teachers want them to move on. Administrators want them to move on because that affects their graduation rate and all the rest. And kids don't want to repeat the third grade 5 or 6 times. So everybody has an interest in meeting these standards. But because of Democrats and progressives, tests are racist and they're undoubtedly transphobic as well and all the rest of it. Well, when it turns out that you say we got a test and you're gonna take the test, and whether you pass or not is going to determine whether you go to the next grade or not. And if you fail, then you're going to be 13 years old surrounded by kids who are 12 years old, and then you'll be 13 years old. You'll be 14-year-olds surrounded by kids who are 12 years old, and you're going to get further and further behind. So it turned out that Mississippi's test scores went way up. So there is hope in that sense. But this whole Democratic corruption machine is so embedded now. I just don't see any way to vote your way out of it. In California, short of collapse, which is the crisis. So what does that mean? Look, I was thinking about this. When we found out what the last crisis was on December 8th of 1941, the first thing we started doing is building a navy. We started building airplanes and tanks, but we started building a navy, and we built a navy so that 3 years later we went from having one carrier on duty at one time in 1940 and 42 or 43 was USS Enterprise versus the Empire of Japan. 2 years later, when the Japanese signed the surrender in Tokyo Bay, we had 33 aircraft carriers, and more of them were coming down the ways. And we put a fleet of airplanes over that ceremony, and it took a couple of hours for all of the bombers and fighters to fly over Tokyo Bay. So once we knew what the crisis was and what the fight was going to be, then we started preparing for that. If you asked me if I had to bet money, I would say that we're going to, and I don't cherish having to say this, but if it's not a crisis, if it's not unpleasant, I think we're going to have to start thinking about building facilities and prisons for tens of millions of people. I think there's tens of millions of Americans who are so radicalized and so poorly educated, and people hear me say that and they think inner city black kids. I'm not talking about them or just them. When I look at things like body cam footage and I see these rich white liberal kids getting pulled over for a traffic violation for speeding, and the policeman, this is just a routine thing for at least for me and regular people. Policeman walks up and says, I want to see your license, your registration, and your insurance, please. Well, I don't have any of those. Well, why? Well, because I don't need a license to drive. It's only if you drive a truck. Well, you do need a license to drive, so I need to see some ID. Well, I'm not going to give you ID because I don't have any ID. Okay, I need you to step out of the car, please. Why? Because because you need to step out of the car. I'm giving you a direct legal order to step out of the car. I don't feel like stepping out of the car. I'm not safe. I don't feel safe stepping out of the car. Maybe you're going to step out of the car. I am not going to step out of the car. And this thing escalates. I've seen it 35, 40, 50 times now. This thing continues to escalate to the point where the police officer has to say, ma'am, I've warned you 13 times. I've watched him 13 times. I think actually the police are too accommodating now because they lose control of the situation and start bargaining with these people. But eventually they say, well, if you don't come out of the car now, we're going to smash the windows and we're going to pull you out of the car. I don't want to do that. And that's what every single police officer I've seen in these large numbers of these confrontations. I don't want to do this. Go home. Walk home. We don't want to arrest you. We don't want to do this. Just walk home. But nope. So the police smash the window, and then instantly these Gen Zers just act astonished, like, my God, what the F are you doing? What the hell what are you doing? And then they reach in and pull him out and turn him around and handcuff him. You can't put me in handcuffs. You can't put me in. I'm not. You're under arrest. I'm not under arrest. I'm not under arrest. It's against the law. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. I know my rights. You can't arrest me like this. And just arguing. And it's somewhat gratifying to see, for the first time in their lives, not being able to talk their way out of this. And again and again and again, you've got these people who've never been told no ever, until they finally end up getting arrested. They take the ride into the police station. They're banging their head against the side of the car. They're doing everything they can. They're spitting and biting and kicking, all of this stuff. And you think, finally, a lesson has been learned. And then you find out that the charges were dropped. She kicked a police officer and bit another one, and they decided to drop the charges. She got away with a $200 fine. That kind of thing. Okay, all right. That's where I think the battle lines are going to be, between lawful behavior and unlawful behavior. I really think that's it. And I think that when you look at this whole thing as a you look back on World War II, it's all pretty simple. Pearl Harbor or Midway, Lady Gulf, victory, just like that. 4 years. No, these things take time. And when I see this attitude among the most privileged members of society, they're all young, rich, and almost all of them, not all, but almost all of them are women. And this is something that we should be completely terrified about. And that is that it's starting to look to me, because I look at a lot of data and a lot of information, that's what I do, and I am seeing more and more evidence on a daily basis that women are becoming far more lawless and prone to violence than men. And that is a sign that you are in deep trouble. Because in a healthy society, if two men start, beating their chests and so on, the women are supposed to come, it's not worth it, come on, turn around, walk away. That's how it's supposed to work. But nope. Now the women are more violent, they're more abusive, they're certainly more rebellious, and they're also considerably sluttier than even the men are. This is not how people are wired. And this is why I know this sounds like a strange thing to throw into something that sounds like World War III, but honestly, if you look at what's going on out there, you look at the rise of these Karens and how many Karens there are and how furious they are, how absolutely emotionally out of control they are. They're backing their cars into people because they parked in front of their house. This kind of Karen, the Karenoid, epidemic that we're facing now. I look at these women and I think, these are the most miserable and happy. This is what feminism has done to them, They have just so much anger and so much rage and so much sense of being, so much injustice done to them that they really think that they can do it. Karen wants to talk to the manager. Why? Well, because her ketchup package was damaged. I demand to speak to the manager. I'm not leaving, and I'm calling the cops. Okay. I can see it. You can see it too. It's unraveling. That's the bad news. The good news is it's not unraveling for all of us. And so what are these battle lines? If you're going to have a crisis, you got to have two sides, right? And it's tempting to say it's Republicans versus Democrats, because I think the numbers generally are pretty lopsided. But nevertheless, what it really comes down to, I think, is going to be law-abiding adults versus lawless children. And these lawless children are now in their 40s and 50s. And these two things cannot exist together. And so I don't have any doubt about which side's going to prevail in this. I'm going to go with the competent, well-armed side. That's the side I'm going to take. Definitely, I'm going to go with the educated, hardworking, disciplined, confident, extremely well-armed side, rather than the lawless, uneducated, stupid, entitled, vicious, angry, furious, raging, lunatic side. But that's still a huge problem. How do you deal with that? I don't usually open this up to comments. We have constantly got comments running, and I glance over them, and every now and then I'll see something where somebody asks me a direct question, and I generally just say, don't look at that, because you just stay on target. However, I'm curious to know what you do. Dave Big Booty said, I'm not well armed. You have lost all your guns in that kayak accident by Macho Grande. Well, it was actually not by Macho Grande, Dave. I lost those weapons over Macho Grande. Your turn. Yes, I was flying and they fell out the cargo door while I was over Macho Grande. Good, Dave. I'll just hold the show for you here. Over Macho Grande? I don't think I'll ever be over Macho Grande, Dave. Okay. There you go. But seriously, I'd like to get the audience's take on this. What do you do when you're facing open lawlessness? This goes across the entire spectrum. It goes from entire groups of people raiding a Target store at once and just walking out with all this stuff, and you can walk it right up through all these entitled, nasty, stupid, combative teens and people in their early 20s, highly privileged, usually rich people, just refusing to obey the law. And you can take it even further into things like the Black Lives Matter protest, and especially things like this Stop Oil, where everybody just gets down and they sit in the road and just block traffic. I've watched a few of those lately too. Mostly a European problem so far. I suspect largely because I think that in America there might be a few people who maybe just accidentally stepped on the accelerator instead of the brake. But what do you do when you've got half of your country sitting down in the road, arms linked, doing what they've been told their entire lives is necessary to save the planet, and then you're holding up 4 miles of people who have to go to work? What do you do? I'm really curious to know, what do you do? What do you do when you've got millions and millions and millions of illegal aliens in this country? And despite what the progressives want to tell you, these are not families that are coming over. It's not a grandmother holding on to a niño looking for bread. These are military-aged men coming over by themselves. What do you do when you find out there's 10 million, 20 million? I mean, I don't think the Nazis ever had I don't think there was, even in the Eastern Front, I don't think there was ever 10 million people on the field at the same time. But what do you do with this? And that's just the vanguard. What do you do? I'm not saying they're programmed, I'm not saying that they're on a mission, I'm not saying that they got secret instructions, because they don't have to be. What I am saying is that people who are trying to get rid of this country are not only allowing this to happen, they're encouraging it to happen, and we all know who they are. So what do you do? Monk in Training for a super chat there says, you do the ugly business of bringing down the law. Again, that is about as beautifully phrased as I have ever heard it. In fact, I like that so much, I'm going to write that down. I am actually going to write that down, and well done there, Monk in Training. I'm going to copy that verbatim, because that's what we're facing. That's exactly, precisely what we're facing. Give me 1 second. I will quote you on this on Saturday night. You do the ugly business of bringing down the law. Amen. So now we're kind of getting to the heart of Ian Nolan's question. Are we prepared? Are we prepared emotionally? Because it's not going to be a shooting war. Are we prepared to do the ugly business of bringing down the law? Because there will come a time when we will be forced to. And that's going to be where the crisis is in full display. Are we prepared to do the ugly business of bringing down the law? Because we know what we're facing. If we decided to start evicting illegal aliens, then we would see on the news nothing but white police officers taking screaming children and crying women away. And if they weren't put in cages, they would invent cages for them. And then all of that. So what do you do? And here's where we get, Roger Ramjet was just on what I was about to say. He says the DAs won't back us. Yes. Now we're at the heart of the issue. What do you do? In fact, it's so good I'm going to write this down too. Just Give me 1 second. What do you do as a country when the people who are running law enforcement and justice are the ones who are making it a criminal act to enforce the law and bring justice? Now you're at the point where if you defend your property, then the DA will put you in jail. If you are a Border Patrol agent and you arrest illegal aliens, you'll be fired. This is the heart of the problem. What do you do when the law is against, when the people who have the color and authority of law have a mission to make sure that the law is not enforced, and the people who would then take it upon themselves to enforce the law, regular citizens, now become criminals? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with it? Kasama001 says, no body, no crime. I kind of like the way you're thinking. Sorry, it's a great... Can I get a channel? Says, my forefathers bled and died to create this fine country, and everybody's just shitting it away out of ignorance. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. We are now facing the 2020 crisis. People are just shitting it away out of ignorance. That's it. That's why, while there is not a, as I've said before, needs to say again, there is not, I'm convinced, there's not some chief Marxist sitting in a basement tapping out Morse code instructions that they get beamed out like the RKO radio signals, like beep, 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 this is what we're going to do today. But they did have a plan, these Marxists and the Frankfurt School. If you take over journalism first, then you can control the information flow. If you control the information flow, and then if you go after entertainment, you can tell the next generation, this next cohort, what they should think and how they should feel, what kind of occupations to get into. If you own those two things for a whole generation, then if you start, or certainly 2 generations, then if you stop obeying the law, they won't have anything to compare it to. These kids didn't grow up with John Wayne or Gary Cooper or any of those things. They didn't grow up with John Robinson or Captain Kirk. They didn't grow up with any of it. They just don't care. They are told, and have been told for damn near 2 generations now, that this system is designed to perpetuate slavery and white supremacy, and they believe it. And so now we have a pretty clear idea of what this conflict is going to look like. This is what it's going to look like. Roger Ramjet also says, never underestimate the World Economic Forum. This is what the World Economic Forum wants, by the way. It's one thing I'm utterly convinced of. People say, well, what do they want? What do they want? What are their goals? And I'm sure they have a bunch of goals, but the 2 things I'm sure of is they want fewer people in the world, and they also want the elimination of the middle class, because the middle class lives damn near as well as they do, and that's intolerable to them. And when you've got 200-300 million Americans living damn near as well as they do, then what's the point of being an aristocrat? This control defect that they've got has been stopped for 250 years because of the geniuses that got together in Philadelphia. And they want it back, and they're doing whatever they have to do to get it back. And so they know they can't come at us with police. They know they can't come at us with tanks because we'll shoot back. So they're making lawlessness the norm. Part of that is to provoke us into shooting back. But ultimately, this is part of the Cloward Pliven, whatever their names are. Overload the system, flood the system, have so many people apply for welfare, have so many people loot a store so that the system cannot handle it. That means the system then goes into martial law mode, which gives them more ammunition that the system is corrupt, and that's how it works. So, yeah. So what do we do about that? Monk in Training again says, when I was in rabbi school, my British friend and I were talking about how leftists fight. He said one day real racists would take over and go overboard. Yes, that's the general idea. That's the general idea. So, So what is it? What does that look like? Well, we have a lot of advantages here. I don't know what percentage of the country now is urban. I do remember the day back in 2009 or something when statistically they said that as of this month or whatever, there are officially, in terms of census, more people living in urban areas than there are in rural areas. I don't know how they define those things. I don't know what a suburb counts as or whatever. But there's no question that there are more people living in cities now than there were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 20 years ago, for that matter. And the closer you get to the center of these cities, these blue stains on a red map, the more toxic it gets till you get to right to the center of that city. And that place is one of the worst places in the world. P.J. O'Rourke, who had so much influence on me, wrote a book called Holidays in Hell, where he went around the whole planet looking at some of the worst places he'd ever seen. He went to, apartheid in South Africa. He went to these barrios in South America. He went to the worst places there were. And he later wrote that he'd never been anywhere that was as dangerous, as filthy, as depressing, or as just plain gloomy as a public housing project in Philadelphia. So what do? You know? I look at this situation and say, first of all, I'm really, really glad to be on the side I'm on. Even though I live in a suburb of Los Angeles, if things go south, I can go someplace where people are growing food, and I can say I will work a shovel and I will do more shoveling than I consume. But it looks like what we're going to be left with is law-abiding people who are living honestly, who have worked hard, always worked hard, pass that on to their kids, living largely in the country or at least not in cities, who have their own weapons and who are going to be faced with floods of refugees, of people either asking for or demanding food, services, and housing and all the rest of it. And so how do you deal with that? And folks, that's when it starts to look a little bit like the zombie apocalypse, you know. I don't know. I don't trust this guy. Yes. Well, this is where the weakness is, and I don't mean weakness in a particularly bad way, but seriously now, just ask yourself the question. All right, ask yourself the question. If you are sitting there in your town, and you have to put barricades up, and there's a minivan with 2 women and 6 kids, and they're saying we have nothing to eat. Can we please come in? And behind them are more cars with more people. I don't think the issue is they're going to overrun the town. The question is, how far are you willing to go? Are you going to turn them away? Because if you do, that's going to be the fight. That internal morality is going to be the fight. If you don't, then you're going to pretty quickly be overrun. And once you let the ruthless people inside the city, the murderers, the people that will just use force and power to get what they want, once they're inside, then it's probably too late. So, what do you do about that? You know? None of us want to be that person, but we might have to be. AOC says it's the lifeboat fallacy. How is it a fallacy? Is it a fallacy, or are you talking about like the scenario? Because a fallacy would suggest that the lifeboat analogy is not accurate. To me, it seems incredibly accurate. This is the question, right? This is the question. You're in a lifeboat. The ship has gone down. There are people in the water. The lifeboat is full. If you start taking on more people, everyone will die. But more people want to live, and you can say, okay, good, lifeboat scenario. And you can say, and you'd be right, that they have every right to be in that lifeboat, at least as much right as you do, and the only reason you're fighting them off is because you're in it and they're not. You'd be right about that too. But That's kind of what it comes down to. Now, we have a little bit more moral comfort in this case, because I think a large number of these people will be people who did not buy tickets on that liner and who don't really have a moral right to that lifeboat. But what do you do? I'm not afraid of these people in terms of any kind of a classical military sense. When I look out there and I look at BLM and Antifa, especially, Antifa is really, really, really interesting, because Antifa fancies itself as prior crisis warriors. We're essentially the SA. We're street warriors, and we wear blackened boots, and we're ready to go out there and smash windows and kick butt. Well, I've studied history, and I've seen lots of people that were willing to go out and smash windows and kick butt, and they did. These people are willing to smash windows and kick butt as long as they're allowed to. When somebody arrests them or starts shooting back at them, in the case of one individual I can think of, then all of a sudden they start crying. So I'm not worried about them in terms of, I'm not saying that I'm not worried about them on an individual basis, but in terms of, like, if this actually comes down to a battle, then I'm not worried about them. I'm utterly convinced that 3 or 4 veterans could take out entire cities worth of Antifa. So people have been talking about civil war. I think that's probably what we're talking about in that sense, but I don't like the term civil war because it's more complicated than that. It's more nuanced than that. It's 5th generation stuff, as Ian pointed out. It's not just that. Civil war was essentially fought over one issue. This is fought over many issues, and it's not as binary as the Civil War was. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And that is going to be the challenge that we're going to have to face. And the good side of this is, if you're thinking about, okay, so let's say it's 1939, Bill, and you know that the Japanese are coming in 1941, what would you do? Well, first thing I'd do is I'd get my radar technology up to speed, and then I would get a bunch of fighter planes and get the best fighter planes I could, start building the best fighters in the world I could. I'd have them on duty, and I'd have them on patrol. I'd do all the things that I could do to stop the Pearl Harbor raid. But that's not how these things work. But if I had to guess, I think one of the things that we would do in the early stages of this thing is we better make the Republican Party considerably more attractive to the people who will become our allies. And we're seeing this already all across the country. And Republicans are +6 now. They're almost never up in terms of self-identification. So we'd better make the Republican Party someplace that's considerably hipper, cooler, and more accessible to people without giving up our principles. That's the first thing. And so, if you divide the country in half, Republicans and Democrats, when the cities begin to collapse, most of the people will want to be on the side of law and order. And because of this crisis, then they're going to get basically the choice. And the choice is essentially going to be, we will feed you provisionally until we see that you're serious about working hard, and if we don't get any of this conservative type values, hard work, willing to defend the place, do the dirty work, you get the dirty work, you're all on probation. Large numbers of people will pick the right side on that. And so we're going to see a lot of recruits. Nobody's going to be going to the Democrats in the next crisis. Nobody's going to be moving to them. They have their toxic cadres, and they've done their damage, and it's clearer and clearer to me that this is not something you can educate them out of. They have owned 3 generations now. So, in Narcotics Anonymous, when you're dealing with drug addicts, you would say that, well, first of all, I'd say 2 things. One of them was, you would say somebody, how deep is their bottom? In other words, in 12-step programs for alcoholics or whatever, you go into the program because you hit a bottom. things have been getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Your life gets more and more unmanageable, more and more painful, until finally the point comes where you simply cannot take the pain any longer, and you decide you're going to change your life and going into having the courage to walk into one of these 12-step programs or whatever. So some people have a bottom that's not too deep. They don't have to be in too much pain. You know, maybe they get a divorce, or they have to lose a top-level job and they get a smaller job, and they make changes earlier. Some people end up with needles in their arms, sleeping under freeway overpasses, and they still won't change. So, Roger Amjad says Dems are going to pick up the illegal alien vote, though, and they cheat too. I think we're kind of past voting at this. I'm not saying at this point. I'm saying if things continue the way they're continuing. Two quick super chats here. One from Stryker. It says Trump is high in the polls, but what do you think is the likely outcome if, when the libs cheat again? The Republicans are full of rhinos. And then below that is Monk in Training saying Carlin was right. I think he meant to say it's a big club and we ain't in it. Yes, all that's true. So I think things like, let me put this as clearly as I can. It is possible. I don't think it's possible to avert this crisis. I do think it is possible to soft land the crisis, and we're going to find out about that in 2024. If America has already had enough of this, and they show up for, it is possible to overwhelm their ability to cheat. So it is possible that we could soft land this, and there's any number of gradated differences between a soft landing and then just going in full speed straight into the ground. But if the latter happens, then it is going to look very much like the zombie apocalypse. I don't know how else to describe it. It's going to be large numbers of desperate, violent people who are absolutely incapable of anything other than taking what they want to live, and you can't really fault them for that, at least that last part, because pretty much everybody will do that. So what do? Soft landing it means, enforcing the law, and when people break the law, then they go to jail. I don't think you have to put those Gen Zers that I talked about, or those Karens for that matter, I don't think they have to do a lot of time in jail. I think a month would do it. But we're talking about tens of millions of people. And then some of them will wake up and then others won't. This is why they're flooding the border. This is why they're offering citizenship to anybody who can get here and making it as easy to get here as possible. They are buying their votes by telling these people, come over here, we won't enforce the borders, come on over, we'll give you big old benefits, all you have to do is vote for us. It's an attractive offer. Very attractive offer. But the lifeboat argument is the lifeboat argument. You can apply that argument that they're making. Well, what right do we have to deny people entry? We're here, right? We came from somewhere else. Yeah, that's true. We came here legally and all the rest of it. We still have ways to let people legally enter the country, and I have personal knowledge about this because my wife is an American citizen, and it took 6 years to do that. But you really do have the lifeboat situation, because if you buy that argument, then there's 8 billion people that have every right to be here, as we do. And now we start getting into the part of this thing that Ian pointed out in terms of this being information warfare about thoughts and minds in spiritual warfare. This is where we get into this kind of thing. There's only one moral defense, in my opinion, one moral defense against, let me rephrase that, one moral defense in favor of enforcing the borders. Because if you buy that everybody has a right to live free and so on and so on, and prosperity, that means 8 billion people can come to America. And so what moral right do we have to lock the doors once we're inside? And my feeling on this is that this prosperity, which we're fighting to maintain and they're trying to destroy, is not locked in a vault someplace. It's not like we have all the gold in the world. It's not like we have all the food in the world. And it's most especially, it's not like the U.S. Constitution is a highly classified document that's kept in the bowels of the Pentagon someplace. If they want to live a better life, then they should make their own societies better. And I'm all about helping them do that. And throwing money at them doesn't help. But when you get to the point where we had to fight and build this country. We had to do it. The people who are citizens here have ancestors who were citizens here who put a great deal of sweat and blood and money into building this country. And so we earned our place here. The answer to this, to turning people away at the border, is going to be, I'm sorry, but this is a lawful land filled with lawful, hardworking people who have certain skills, and you are going to have to take this problem back to your country and make your country a better place to live, because we can't take 8 billion people here. This is the lifeboat argument. And the moral justification for being in the lifeboat is, well, we built the damn lifeboats. You were the one who told us we didn't need lifeboats. We're the one who built them anyway, because we had a feeling this would happen. So now that we built the lifeboats that you said we didn't need, and we're in them, and you called us all monsters and fascists and Nazis and stuff when we were building our lifeboats, you are the ones who said no. Well, now it's kind of grasshopper in the ant kind of thing. Now everybody wants to be in the lifeboat. So I don't know. That's, to me, the broad outlines of it. I think that's what it looks like. And as crises go, it's going to be exceedingly painful for a lot of people, but I don't think it's going to be exceedingly painful for the red states. I think, well, we already know what the cities can look like, because they already look that way. It's just going to get bigger and nastier and more violent and nastier, more violent and nastier. I do think that we have not only a moral but also a practical interest in allowing people who genuinely either have goodwill or have changed their minds. I think we have a moral and a practical obligation to accept them if they're willing to play by the rules. You know, if they're willing to play by the rules, and that is a provisional. That's a multi-year probation thing. Look, I just want to be clear about this, right? I live in California. If this thing actually happens and I move and I find a way to get to Texas and there's a barricade there or something, right? I'm going to say, listen, I will do whatever you need me to do in exchange for food that day, and I will keep doing that for as long as you want me to. And if you're telling me that I don't get to vote in your elections, then I have no problem with that whatsoever. That's the price of me having a meal today. I'm fine with that. I understand it completely. Got it. And if it turns out that in order to eat that day, they want me to live in a provisional community where a bunch of people from California are being held to see whether they're actually serious about going to work or not, then okay. That's a reasonable request, I think. Well, we got Raiders here. Look at this one, all the way up to 63. Anyway, I think it's probably time, despite the fact that the Raiders just arrived, to change to the next question, because number one, we got to get more questions, and number two, I've pretty much talked this out, and number three, anybody coming in on the tail end of this argument without hearing the front end of it is going to be a little bit put off. But Ian, thank you very much for that. That was absolutely great. Okay, Eric Blake. Hi, Bill. I know it's long-winded. I assure you it's worth it. I did learn from the best. Well, you can be long-winded when you have your own show. So last week you really struck a chord on a big issue, but not in the way you'd think. Namely, you brought up how it was ultimately up to my generation and the Zoomers to lead the fight to fix things up. Here's what I mean. That same night I asked, how do we handle X crisis when it happens? To which you replied, I don't know. Now, let's see, we've got a swarm of, now we're up to 67 now. Right. Hello, new people. This got me to thinking, how many books and essays have we gotten for so many years warning about the current coming crisis on XYZ, and it's all laid out beautifully, but when it gets in the end, it's all time to talk about solutions. The writer gives precious little beyond basic platitudes and goals. I tried to do a little more than that this time. What we're told, very quickly, Fire Waco says it just asked for me if you want to get into Texas. Thank you very much. I do have my my honorary copy of Texas citizenship, which was issued to me by Ted Cruz, standing by in my wallet, folded and ready to present on demand. We're told that needs to happen, but not how to make it happen. It's like our pundits en masse think stay informed is the be-all and end-all. Sadly, instruction manuals don't seem to be our MO culturally or politically, and so we get a lot of folks either throwing up their hands or calling to fight, fight, fight. To be clear, I'm not faulting you or anyone else. We need to be informed in order to address issues in the first place, but perhaps your point about millennials and Zoomers speaks to this higher truth. It's up to us youngsters to write out those instruction manuals our nation so desperately needs. Are you onto something? If we're talking about generations as cohorts, then that generation, your generation, is not going to write it out of an abundance of hard work and patriotism. They're going to have to figure out the new rules, because they're going to be the ones who are the young adults at the time of the crisis. That's what this theory is basically about. It's basically about facing a situation that has never essentially been faced before and coming up with new solutions to it. This thing got started a couple shows ago by talking about the fact that we can't know what the solutions are. We're going to have to invent new solutions as they come along. And I don't know what those solutions are yet, and I'll probably live through them to see them, but it is going to mean, I think, a significant change in our... I don't think it's going to mean a significant change in our ethical values. I think it's going to mean a significant change in our backbone values, in our spine, in our willingness to do exactly what he said. It's going to come down to enough of a change so that we will be willing to do the ugly business of bringing down the law. We're not willing to do that right now. We're not willing to do the ugly business of bringing down the law now. And sooner or later, we're going to have to be. As I say, the primary problem is if you try to enforce lawfulness, then the law enforcement officials will likely target you and not the criminals. That's the heart of the problem, is that the laws will be deployed against the lawfully abiding citizens, and now you've got a real nub of the issue. A couple of super chats here. Crikey. I love that word. I just love that expression, crikey. With a super chat, thank you very much. Shout out from Canberra, Australia. FYI, AFL Grand Final on Saturday, 2:30 AEST. I guess that'd be Australian Eastern Standard Time. If you want to tune in to one of the world's greatest football competitions. How about that? I did not know that. I did spend about 6 months in Brizzy, crikey, in 1999. And I watched Australian rules football, which I thought was really interesting. Watched a lot of rugby, and I thought rugby would be really great because what they're always saying about American football is they're just constantly stopping. Most of the time in American football, nothing's happening. People are in the huddle. I thought, oh, rugby would be great because the ball's always moving. And then I realized, this is my personal take on it, is that rugby is essentially a 60-minute fumble. And there's something very American about American football, which is sensible if you think about it. It really is this kind of, here's our plan, here's your plan, all right? it's almost like a chess game with a great deal of physical violence involved. Because that's basically what it is, and you don't really get a sense of that unless you play one of those like Madden football games, at least the early versions of them, because you're out there and you have to basically pick a defensive play. You've got to hope that you've got the right play in there for the offensive play that the person's going to likely deploy based on their talent and their team and their field position and all the rest. And if it turns out you are going heavy against the run and you don't have enough guys in the backfield and they lob a little short pass over the line and they go all the way. So there's something interesting about that. Yeah, and Roadrunner talks about George Carlin's football versus baseball, which is not only the most brilliant thing he ever did, maybe the most brilliant observation that a social comedian has ever made. Anyway, thank you very much for that, Australia. I loved Australia. I absolutely loved it. I loved the people there. I loved everything about it. I thought it was a great place, beautiful place in Brisbane, Queensland, on the east coast there, and I just had so much fun, and just the friendliest, nicest people, and I think Australians and Americans are more alike than any two people in the world. I think Americans and Australians are more alike than Americans and Canadians are, generally speaking, because we're both tend to be rebellious kind of scamps, and we both had the simple pleasure of shooting at redcoats. So there's that. Unlike those palmy bastards up in our frontier to the north, those savages. Seriously, the border with the U.S. and Canada is historically miraculous. There's never been two countries in the world that have had a better relationship, that have shared the kind of border that length rather. Striker 1553 says, my dad said one thing, Jesus is still on the throne. I think we have a shot, but this economy is going downhill fast and people need him now. Fear not. Yeah, this economy is going downhill fast. Nobody can look at a $35,000-$40,000 billion debt and not know that this is going to end sometime, and that the people who are supposed to be in charge of this are simply stealing. As we mentioned earlier, Baltimore has 11% proficiency rate in mathematics, and the head of the Baltimore School Department makes $445,000 per year. And I have no doubt whatsoever that person will be reelected. So moving on here, we have Eli Noor, 2 for Eli Noor, we have Chris Taylor again, G.K. Masterson, Ray, Charles Tomes, Roadrunner, and then Eric. I'm not going to be able to do all of these. I'm not going to do doubles. I'm so sorry. Let me just find out which ones I can take. So at least I'll get to everybody. I just won't get to everybody twice. Okay, so let's see. You got 2 for me and Nora. Let me pick one of these. Hang on 1 second. One of the questions from Eli is about the dress code thing. We did a right angle about this, which I should have posted last night, and now I'm looking at I have to post tonight, and honestly don't know how I'm going to stay awake for it. But so I'll take the other question. Does the fact that Newsom is now slated to debate DeSantis on Hannity solidify the theory that Newsom is being set up to take over for Biden in 2024? While DeSantis may have something to gain, it doesn't seem as if Newsom would unless this were the case. Any thoughts? Yeah, I saw Newsom on Hannity, and I thought that, well, the reason he's governor of California is because he can lie very convincingly. He talks about how California's never been better, and it's the single greatest place for investment, and just lists all these wonderful things that are happening in California. And that's against Hannity. I'm looking forward to this debate because it seems to me that DeSantis is the kind of guy who's got enough backbone to really go for the kill on this. It is definitely a chance for DeSantis to really break out. If DeSantis can dismember and dismantle the blue state argument, I mean, convincingly and, somewhat brutally, just the way Newsom needs to be dealt with is just just rhetorically brutal attack on him, then there might be a gain for it in DeSantis' favor. I think Newsom is the likely candidate for 2024. I don't even think the Democrats even have any. I don't think they have the slightest consideration for such a thing as a Democratic primary anymore. And I don't think they've had for a long time. I think in 2016 we saw Bernie Sanders being shown the door even though he was winning. In 2020, same thing. Joe Biden's not even on the ticket. Next thing you know, he's winning every state. So they don't take their primaries seriously. So they will decide who they want to be. They have superdelegates, which is basically the Democratic Party will decide who the nominee is going to be, not the people who are members of the Democratic Party. Kind of an odd sort of arrangement for a company that calls itself the Democratic Party, but then again, this is how you lie your way to winning. So Gavin Newsom is very smooth, and Gavin Newsom will have a number of cherry-picked facts at his disposal, and that's why I say that DeSantis is going to have to just go after him with a bulldozer. And I would, if I were DeSantis, I would keep all of the economic statistics that I have in my pocket. I wouldn't lead with those. I'd keep them in my pocket. I'll tell you what I would lead with. Said this before, and I'll say it again. I saw when Newsom was first running for office, I don't remember what year that was. Was that 2014 maybe? I don't remember, honestly. That seems about right. 16, I don't remember. Anyway, when Newsom was first running for governor, I didn't see Newsom, I saw the Republican challenger to Newsom, and I was front row. And this guy started speaking. In fact, by the time he finished his first two sentences, I said, we're going to get creamed by these guys. Because this guy was just so phony. He was just so unbelievably, polyester, and, it was just awful. And while I was sitting there for an hour or whatever listening to this guy, I just said, why aren't you going for the throat here, man? If you're going to debate Gavin Newsom, especially as California governor, I would have started every debate by saying, excuse me just one second, I'm willing to give up just 15, 20 seconds of my time here. I'm just checking this app here, which shows me where the largest concentrations of human excrement and disposed drug needles are in the city that you were mayor of, because your policies destroyed one of the most beautiful cities in the world and got it to the point where people have to have an app on their telephone so that they can walk around the larger piles of human excrement lying in the streets and people excreting on the streets. And that's what you did to San Francisco, and that's what you're trying to do to California. And I have no doubt you're trying to do it to the whole country one day. And I just want to get a little update on what's going on today and let people know parenthetically what they're in for if they fall for this $800 haircut. Anyway, what was your question? That's how you debate Gavin Newsom. You just stick it to him. Stick it to him. And stick it to him morally. Morally. If Newsom comes out with this, we have all this opportunity. California has more than half of all of the welfare cases in the country, more than half of all of the homeless cases in the country. We have all of these things. Just go there and stay there. Don't get into this business about percentages of economic growth and all the rest of it. Talk about the fact that if I was DeSantis, I would come out and say, I think Florida's an extremely beautiful state, but you took probably the most beautiful state in the country where all good ideas happened, not just you, but you Democrats, where aerospace, entertainment, agriculture, pop culture, you're leading the world in everything. And people like you utterly ruined it. It's not just failure now, California. California's not just a failure. It's not just a disaster. It's not even a laughingstock anymore. It's a source of acute embarrassment to Californians to admit that they're from California. This is something they whisper about because they know full well that if they actually say, hey, I'm from California, anybody from the rest of the country is going to go, well, you can just go right back to California and take your insanity with you. That kind of argument, that's how I would deal with Gavin Newsom. I would not give this guy the high ground of getting into the the $800 haircut policy. You know, I wouldn't give him the ground. I just think it's a giant mistake. So we'll see. Now, it's possible that DeSantis could fumble this ball, and that would be bad for DeSantis. I don't see Gavin Newsom fumbling it because it's Newsom's. He's got the exposure. You know, he's not going to break down and cry. He's not going to admit that DeSantis is right. He's just going to keep lying. And I just think you kind of need to really beat him badly enough so that people who are more or less on the fence say, all right, well, that makes a lot of sense. And he is. If I was DeSantis, I would not so much concentrate on why California is such a terrible state. I would concentrate on why Gavin Newsom is such a terrible person and why he is using policies that are so obviously destructive in order to enhance his own personal sense of privilege. That's where I would go. You want people in San Francisco to be crapping on the streets because you want the regular citizens of San Francisco to walk among human filth while you don't have to. That's what your entire motivation is for all of this. You and your elitist relatives like Nancy Pelosi and all the rest of you Chardonnay sipping, hot tub sipping bunch of elitist pigs are absolutely willing to destroy the lives of whoever gets in your way so long as you can have dominance. You don't want a middle class in California. That's clear because the middle class is leaving. You want to be part of the ruling elite and you want just enough people around to do your lawn work. And that's it. That's what you want. That's your vision of California. That's where I would go, and I would stay there. And I would just keep driving that nail in again and again and again and again and again and again and again. This is all about you. You're privileged. All about you. It's all about what you want. You're the kind of you are the living example of somebody who flies a private jet to a global warming conference. You are all about this. We must all cut back on our electricity, meaning all of you. While I live in this mansion, hypocrisy is your lifeblood. It's not like you're hypocritical. It's like if you were to tell the truth once, I think your skin would catch fire. That's where I would go. I would never, ever get off of that topic. I'd just go at him morally and never stop. Never. Never. And DeSantis has the advantage of being a veteran and all the rest of it. I'd pile that on too. You know? What was Gavin Newsom doing when Ron DeSantis was in uniform, defending his country? I'd go there. I'd go right there and I'd stay there. Okay, so moving on here. GK Masterson, hey Bill, my only question is, did you read my email that I sent? If not, please go read it ASAP. Thanks. I did read it, and I haven't had a chance to respond to it yet. I got in late today. I am not going to be able to. I don't think I'm going to be able to make anything between now and the end of October. I'm going to be in this chair between now and the end of October, and I've got one extended road trip on Saturday for an event in Orange County, and even missing the 8 hours that I'm going to miss on Saturday is going to continue to impact my my workload, GK. So I'm just not able to get there. So I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry I have to say it on the air, but that's the reality of where I am right now. But I'm sure you'll continue to be driving your trucks, and I'll continue to be here. And when I get out of this crunch, then I'd be more than happy and be delighted to sit and talk with you and meet you. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Ray Juarez, and then we got Charles Tomes, then we got Roadrunner, and then Billy's gonna. I almost said go home, but then I'm gonna start the 4 or 5 hours of work. Monk and Trading says as a jarhead, DeSantis's credentials are overblown. Maybe, but he wore the uniform, and I'm fairly sure that Newsom didn't, so I'd go and live there. Chris Taylor. Did I? Yes. 2009, you did a video on the power of iconography. That was my second big hit. It doesn't seem to me that the establishment GOP has tried to make any improvements since then. Correct. Now that we know so many elections are decided by vote counters instead of vote counts, does iconography still matter so much? Yeah, absolutely it does. If so, does published iconography now have the same lack of credibility with modern audiences that a highly polished video productions have? I am going to take a moment to drop something into both of these live streams that we have going because it needs to be shown and said, and this is all you need to know. I'm going to make this argument on Saturday as well. I mentioned earlier that when things start to get bad, we're going to have a chance to soak up a lot of people who are going to be looking for some place to go other than the Democratic Party, which has gone insane, and we'd better hip ourselves up a little bit and make it a little more enticing. So let me just go to the heart of the matter, and everything else is just a variation on this. 1 second. I'm looking right at it. Just take a moment here. Okay, great. So I want to drag this into both our streams here so everybody can see what I'm talking about. Because I did, as he's mentioned, do a very good, I thought, afterburner about iconography and how brilliantly Obama and the Democrats had used things like font and color, design. The stage for the 2008 DNC looked like a staircase up to the sky, and the Republican thing looked like a square that somebody had assembled in 45 minutes in the back of a hotel convention room. So take a look at this. Drag it into both of them if it'll go. Yeah, that's not as big as I'd like. Got it into YouTube here. Come on, make it bigger. There we go. Drag it into Twitch, and we'll make that bigger. And we're going to just take a look at this for a minute. Okay, so this is the official logo for the Republican Party, for the GOP anyway. Republican National Committee. So let's have a look at this image, because if I was a Democrat running a campaign for any national election, and I had the ability as the head of the Democratic media division, if I had the ability to design the logo that I was going to run against, no amount of work would be able to beat this. If I was the head Democrat and I had to pick an image for Republicans, I would not be able to top this. This is, in its own unique way, really quite remarkable. So let's just take a look at this. Obviously, it's intended to be an elephant, but what is it really? First of all, it doesn't even have legs. It's got two blocks, and it doesn't have four legs, it just has two, and there's no joints, there's no flexibility. They're big fat squares. It's locked in place. It is like a piece of Lego that has been locked into time and never moves. It is absolutely immobile. It is rigid on the ground. It has no mobility whatsoever, no spark, no spunk, no nothing. It's just plain awful. Now on top of it, you've got this blue sort of thing with these three stars, which doesn't accomplish anything that I can see. But more importantly, the two things that really stand out about this logo are, number one, it's blind. It has no eyes on it. It's just standing there. It's clearly just standing there. And most importantly of all, it makes the trunk of the elephant look like a vestigial organ, like it's some sort of vestigial tail or something. It is the worst logo I have ever seen in my life. It is absolutely appalling, and they will not change it. If you wanted to tell young people that the Republican Party was stodgy, old, boring, immobile, and impotent, you could not improve upon this image. Now, what would I recommend in its place? Well, give me a moment, and I will show you. It's going to take just a second longer than I thought, but not too much longer. Give me 1 second. I'll tell you what some of my ideas would be. Hang on a second. I'll just pick the first one that comes to mind, that I can find, rather. Because you don't have to live with this. There's some good ones here. Let me just find one that... All right. We're going to go with... I don't want one that's too cartoony. There, just a embarrassment of riches here. So I would go with something like this. at least along these lines. Now, I wouldn't take this as it is. I would make a little modification to it, but you get the general idea. Come on. I would take this instead. Let me drop it into Twitch and into YouTube. Hang on. I would replace the thing you're looking at here with this, or something like it. Hang on while I put it in Twitch. It's in YouTube now. Yeah, that's a start. Hang on, let me get over to Twitch. It's very tedious having to do this twice, so I apologize for the dead air. Hang on a second. I'd get rid of this garbage, and I'd replace it with something that looked a bit like this. Now, I would make some changes to this. I would make it not quite so mean, and I would put the rest of the body on there. I wouldn't have just the head, I'd have the rest of the body, but I'd have an elephant up on its hind legs, and maybe have the trunk going up instead of down. This looks a little bit too mean, but nevertheless, it also looks like it means business, and it looks like a freaking elephant, and which reminds me of one other thing that the other logo doesn't have, and that is tusks. It doesn't have tusks. This is what elephants use to defend themselves. Those big old long horns there by the mouth, as you are undoubtedly well aware, those things are called tusks. Let's look at the official logo of the Republican Party and see what that animal defends itself with and fights. Oh, look, there's nothing. Oh, look, there's nothing. It just sits there. It's drawn by a 3-year-old. It is absolutely, absolutely hideous. Now, not only would I change the logo, this is where I would win a lot of votes. A lot. Because I do this in front of, when the subject comes up, I've mentioned this several times in live events, and even the oldest people in the audience just laugh their butts off at this. I would take this logo and I would give it all the energy it had, and then I would, below that, I would put the official logo of the newly rebranded Republican Party, and below that, in big fat bold letters, it would say, "Don't be an ass." That's what it would say. That would be the motto of the Republican Party. Don't be an ass. And that's all you have to say. And if you said that, you would immediately get, I'm thinking 7, 8, 10 points in the polls. Don't be an ass. Just simple. That's it. That's it. We can't even do that. That's too hard for us. Too hard. Don't be an ass. Boom. Cameron says in YouTube, I think the current logo fits the Republican establishment perfectly. Precisely correct. It is, in fact, perfect for the rhinos that are running the party, because this is garbage, and it's so bland. The existing logo, it's so bland. It's so non-confrontational. It's so static. It's so stationary, fossilized, dinosaur. It's all of the things that rhinos are. Of course they love it. They're madly crazy about it. They're the ones who approved it. Don't be an ass. That's it. I swear I say that in front of, and I sometimes worry, because older people have different sensibilities, and I don't want to offend anybody, especially the audience that I'm getting paid to go talk to, but I've never had anybody not burst out laughing at that. Dave Big Booty says, or Big Booty, I should say, says that the existing logo is so Mitch McConnell. It is absolutely Mitch McConnell. And if you were to actually honestly make the Republican Party logo say, "Don't be an ass," then you would immediately be looked at differently. And I would actually go a little further than that. I would also go a little bit further than that. I would actually say, it's interesting how we ended up with these different animals. The elephant is widely considered to be one of the most intelligent animals in the world. They're extremely peaceful animals unless you threaten them and really piss them off, in which case it's like being charged by a giant piece of concrete. They're exceedingly intelligent. They're great social animals. They're very, very good with their families, take good care of their children, and are in the main kind and gentle. But again, if you start messing with them, you're going to have a bull elephant coming at you, and you're not going to like it. Now, on the other hand, the donkey or the ass is known to be one of the most stubborn, one of the most ridiculous, one of the most absurd, nasty, loud animals that there are. It's not that it's stupid, because donkeys aren't stupid. It's just that they're just plain miserably nasty and don't want to cooperate under any circumstances. It's their way or nothing. It's their way or nothing. If they don't get their way, they start braying and they start digging their feet in, and it's perfect for both sides. One of them is an ornery, loud, nasty, mean-spirited, kicking, bronking, selfish brat, and the other one is the Republican. Ba-boom. All right. Really getting hungry too. How am I going to get to all these? I can do this one real quickly from Roadrunner. Sir William Whittle, do you have any comments on the latest Republican debate? I had no desire to watch it myself and couldn't even get up the energy to check out Steve's drunk blogging. And my honest response to that, Roadrunner, was there was another Republican debate. Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. Who cares? We all know it means nothing. So I have nothing to say about it because I didn't even know it was there, let alone watch it. From Ray Juarez. Hello, Bill. Hello, Ray Juarez. An interesting phenomenon that's been happening recently is the leaking of classified documents for military vehicle on War Thunder's forums in an attempt to get the vehicles added to the roster. Now, isn't that interesting? War Thunder, that's really interesting. War Thunder, by the way, is a video game that is, I think it's fair to say, a much simpler version of DCS. I know that when people who think they're good at War Thunder get into a DCS cockpit, they don't know how to turn the jet on. And I may be wrong about this, but I don't think War Thunder has a first-person view. I don't think you look out the window. I think you're always behind the jet, which to me looks like a child's game, but whatever. War Thunder prided itself on its very accurate damage modeling, so it seems like people assume that if the devs get access to documents on the current equipment, then the vehicle will be added or modified. These leaks have been from many different countries and seem to be speeding up as of late. Do you think this lends credibility to your thought that the next crisis is not likely to be war but something else? Don't really know how to tie this into a question, but I figured it was something that would interest you. Have a good day, Bill. Thank you very much, Ray. It does interest me. The main issue here is the continually degrading sense of respect for secrets that should be secret. People walk out of the Defense Department with a thumb drive and billions and billions of dollars worth of work and 2 decades worth of work. Here you go. How much do you want for that? I don't know. I'll take $20,000. That's just just that. I had a chance to do a little DCS before crunch really, really got bad, and the first full fidelity jet that they had in DCS was a full fidelity, meaning that every single switch on the simulation, every single switch does exactly what the switch in the real F-18C does. So that is a high fidelity. There's a high fidelity simulation starting the F-18. Now, assuming you go through the correct procedures and do all your fire checks and all the rest of it, that's the better part of a 10-minute process. But if you want to ignore the safety checks, you still have to turn on the battery, crank on the APU, wait for that to get up to speed, flip it over to the right side, spin up the right side engine, wait till it gets to 26% RPM, crack the throttle from the off position to the idle detent, let that engine come up to speed. Then you can start turning on your various displays and get those things coordinated. If you want to calibrate the displays and do all that right, it's 20 minutes to half an hour. So this is for the F-18C. Now, the Hornet, the Legacy Hornet, is a cool-looking airplane, and it is the Navy fighter in DCS. The problem is that the F-18 in DCS is limited to the AIM 120 AMRAAM C model, which has an effective range of about 30 or 40 miles. And that'd be fine, except that if you're interested in playing in today's world, which I am, I like the reason I like DCS is because if I wanted to fly World War I or something else, I'd probably fly Stormovik or Rise of Flight or something. I like the fact that these are modern weapons, and most of the other weapons on it are modeled very accurately, but the AMRAAM in DCS is the best one is the C model with 30, 40 mile range. Meanwhile, we're going up against Russian jets which have brand new missiles that have a 100-mile range. They're Mach 5, and it's like watching our guys just get slaughtered out there because they just get shot down before they even get into range. Now, this would all be fine if it were true, but it's not true. Last time I checked, there are no Legacy Hornets left in the fleet. There is not a single F-18C on a carrier deck in the Navy today. It is all Super Hornets, which would be the E and the F model. The F-18C was a single-seat variant. The D was a two-seat variant of the old design. Then along comes the Super Hornet, which is the E and F models. The F is the two-seater. The F-18F, the two-seat version of the Super Hornet, is a wicked-looking piece of work. And all of the skins on, I'm getting to the point here, all the skins on DCS for the Legacy Hornets, they all look aged. That's fine with me, but they look like they've been there for a while, because they are. They're brought in the 80s. The Super Hornet skins make it look like they're new airplanes. Now, the Super Hornet, I've heard this argument. I think it's actually an interesting argument. The Super Hornet is so different from the Legacy Hornet that it is essentially a completely new airplane, and that speculation is they just decided to name it a Super Hornet and give it the same general shape because they could get away with selling an upgrade rather than purchasing an entirely new jet. I don't know if that's true or not, but it has the ring of truth to it. So if you look at what's in the fleet right now, there are no Legacy Hornets. There are only Super Hornets, and virtually the entire fleet is flying the AIM-120D. It's a Delta model, which has a range out to about 100 miles roughly. If you've got Ds on board, now you're able to fight seriously. And coming up shortly, are the 260s, which go out to 160 nautical miles. The British have an air-to-air missile called a Meteor, which is about 130, 140 nautical miles, and it is a supersonic air-breathing scramjet. And frankly, if we can't get our act together, we should just buy a bunch of those, because a Meteor is an amazing missile and so on. So why all of this trouble? Well, I started hanging around the DCS forums and saying, now DCS has a mod for the F-18, which reskins the airplane, makes the outside of the airplane look different. But the controls, the radar, the performance, everything, the inside of the airplane is exactly the same. They tacked over a little tiny digital display over the button display, but it is an F-18 Super Hornet on the outside only. None of the avionics, none of the radar, none of the flight controls, none of the performance, none of it is upgraded. So I'm asking myself, since everybody likes doing carrier operations, because landing on a carrier is really, really cool because it's really hard, why does DCS not have a high-quality F-18 Hornet? And it turns out that they don't have the rights to it. Apparently, McDonnell Douglas... Oh, wait a minute, who is it now? Is it McDonnell Douglas? Is it Boeing now, I guess? One of these things licensed the Super Hornet to Microsoft Flight Simulator. So the Super Hornet, which is often called the Rhino, because it's got a very long extended nose. The F-18 Legacy Hornets have strakes that kind of taper up towards the nose. It's kind of a cooler looking airplane, honestly, the C model. The Super Hornets are pretty much straight back, and then a real wide flaring kind of strakes on the side. So DCS as a company is essentially, my understanding, legally prohibited from developing a really accurate F-18 Rhino. The mod looks cool, and I fly the mod because it looks cool. And there is another mod for DCS that'll give you the Delta AMRAAMs. And flying a Super Hornet with the Delta AMRAAMs is good, except it doesn't have the Super Hornet's much better radar, doesn't have the Super Hornet's much better avionics. So all of this to say to your question, if they're leaking it to War Thunder, and War Thunder is using it, then I wonder how they do that legally. I actually gave serious thought to so DCS is essentially open source. DCS puts out official airplanes called modules, and they also have third-party studios that put out official airplanes also called modules, but they also have a much larger community of what are called mods. The difference between a module and a mod is that a module is pretty much a complete aircraft. A mod is just reskinning and changing the performance numbers of an existing aircraft, and it's much more amateur looking. So I just want rhinos, and I want the radars, and I want the deltas. And there is a real good-looking exterior, but it's still got the Legacy Hornet interior, and I'd like there to be a two-seater version. My friend Phil and I played it with the F-18s and played a little bit with the two-seat F-15Es, and we couldn't really figure out what the guy in the back seat is doing in the F-15E. He does have controls back there, but we couldn't quite get that sorted out, and then I got too busy to play, and my DCS got real unstable. So anyway, on some level, I really respect DCS. I don't know whether it's because DCS legally was blocked from doing the Hornet. I've kind of heard the Rhino, rather. I've kind of heard that they don't want to give away, because these simulations can be extremely accurate. You can learn an awful lot about flying a real jet from flying a DCS level full fidelity simulator. And so on one hand, I guess I respect and admire them for this. They can't do anything about the mods, however, because those are just regular citizens. And most of this data is pretty open, I mean, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Ultimately, when it's said and done, it's just a game. But you could go in there and modify the radar. You could modify. All it takes is the money to basically rebuild a 3D model of the interior of the Super Hornet, connect that to the skin, and then just by going into the text file, you change the flake characteristics, turn rate, acceleration, fuel load, all the rest of it. Those are just numbers in a file. I actually started thinking about what it would cost to get a really top quality Rhino for DCS, and I actually thought about doing a little Kickstarter campaign to get it, because a lot of people want it, and all they get is the external. It's a superb external. It's a really good looking mod, but it doesn't fly like a Rhino. And I, for the longest time, thought that the Hornet was a much better looking plane than the Rhino, and I'm starting to change my mind. And now the Rhino, the Block 3 Super Hornet has these conformal fuel tanks, and it has got so a conformal fuel tank is you got to design like the F-15. I think the F-15 was the first one to do it. So you got an F-15 Eagle designed, first flew in 1972, I want to say. And there it is. It's the greatest fighter in the world, 112 victories or something to 0 defeats. And then you say, okay, well, this is an air-to-air fighter. And they would say, not a pound for air-to-ground. This thing is designed to go out there and win the battle space and then let the A-10s come in and do the work. But the F-15 is such an incredible airframe that they decided, no, the F-15, man, is, we could carry a ton of bombs on that thing. It's just got so much lift. That wing is just so big. So they eventually developed the F-15E Strike Eagle, which is a two-seat version, and it was the first plane to have conformal fuel tanks. And basically what they are is they are permanent fuel tanks that are they're essentially bolted onto the existing airframe, but they are more or less aerodynamic. It's like putting a jacket of fuel on top of the existing airframe. And a conformal airframe can look pretty cool sometimes. So then, since we have so many more F-16s than F-15s, they're so much more inexpensive, they decided to buff up the F-16, and the Israelis had a lot to do with this too. So then they put the conformal fuel tanks on the F-16 and made the F-16 into a two-seat variant, And those things are freaking hideously ugly because the F-16 is a work of art. It is just a masterpiece of design. And you start throwing those conformal fuel tanks on that thing, and especially that double canopy doesn't really. It's an abomination. It's effective, but it's an abomination. The Block 3 Super Hornets, which I will now show you because, as somebody pointed out, you want to make cheer build up, you just talk about airplanes. Hang on a second. The Block 3 Super Hornets not only have conformal fuel tanks, they have conformal fuel tanks that are so aggressive that the aircraft looks so different that it actually looks really, really cool. And I will show you what that state-of-the-art Super Hornet looks like. Because the conformal tanks tend to blend out that real sharp line that the Strakes had on the Super Hornet. Plus, it adds a ton of fuel and all the rest of it. It on the F-16, it looks like junk. On the F-18, it looks like the F-18's been working out. Yeah, baby. So here's the Block. The Block 3 Super Hornet. If they had these in the game, I'm very tempted to do a Kickstarter to mod this thing. Look at this thing. It's a bad. Oh, come on, stop doing that, you bloody thing. I just drag you in there. Release, and it's gone. Hang on. You want to be that way? Fine. You can be that way. I'll put it here. Yeah. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Look. Oh man. That is a gorgeous airplane. Hang on there, Twitch. We're getting to you. Don't go away. Look at this beast. Oh, boy. Now that is a badass looking airplane. The conformal tanks are those bulges on top of the wing, and it just looks nasty. It is just a nasty thing. Unlimited Hornet Works, who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, says the Block 3's conformal fuel tanks also lifting bodies. Correct. They're curved on the top, which means they're adding a little bit of lift. You put something over a wing area, you're pretty much destroying the wing. But these things are actually providing lift. I don't know whether they provide more lift than they lose, but damn, that is a good-looking airplane. That airplane looks like it means business. That is a 21st century fighter. I freaking love it. And I wish they would get this thing into DCS as a mod, and I'm very tempted to say, hey, guys, we got to do this. We just got to do it. Needless to say, once DCS finds out that Bill Whittle is involved with this, well, then things will happen very, very quickly, no doubt. Let me just turn all this garbage off. Come on, off. Okay. All right. I think we have one more. So, yeah, so I don't know why War Thunder is able to do it and DCS isn't. My opinion is I think DCS could easily take information on the Super Hornet that is readily available in many, many different sources and get a really good module that is close enough for a bunch of, fighter pilot wannabes sitting in their houses at nighttime. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. In fact, it can't be, but it's awful close. The F-18 that they have is phenomenal, and it's really, really, really fun to just start that thing up. It's a 10-15 minute process, and you just, you taxi out to the runway, and there's no difficulty settings on DCS. DCS doesn't have like an easy, medium, hard thing. DCS is DCS, man. I love it. All right, here we go. Last one from Charles Tomes. It's always worth the introduction. From an undisclosed location in flyover country where a square foot is actually 144 square inches, but 8 inches is actually this size. Thank you very much, Darth. Okay. Thank you very much, Darth. Chuck the Merciless ponders, will the entire house of cards that is New York City real estate values finally come crashing down just because feces-flinging monkeys are proceeding with a civil case against the Donald? Darth Chuck the Merciless would have suggested a different question based on the Republican debate last night, but he apparently fell asleep as the candidates began chattering in harmony and he randomly sang the opening theme to Gilligan's Island, which is something I often do when I'm that bored too. So I'm with you on that one, Chuck, my brother. All right, so I don't know that the declining real estate values in New York City are, I don't know how related they are to Donald Trump, because this is much bigger than Donald Trump. New York is getting to be worse than I've seen it. It's not as widespread as it used to be, but where it is toxic, it seems to be more toxic than ever. This is the thing about rich liberals. They will live in their skyscrapers and their limousines for as long as they possibly can, but once this kind of crime actually touches them, then they're out of there. They're just like parasite, wasp, or whatever that damn animal is that lays its eggs inside of other healthy creatures and eats them out from the middle and then kills them and then flies off and finds another victim. Cities are, the entire idea of a city, it's hard to believe actually, because some of this stuff goes way back. Well, it goes back to the invention of cities, essentially the invention of writing and specialization, all that. But for prehistory up until the point of the industrial era, cities were useful as trade nodes. Roads coming in from here, and here, almost always on a access to a body of water, and they were primarily trade centers where all of the goods and services produced by this particular area. You're in England, you get wool from sheep and you send it to London. Ships goes out from London to India where they need wool and they don't, and they have tons of spices, and the spices come back, everybody trades, everybody gets richer. In the industrial era, that traditional use of cities as a trade center became much more important because factories had to manufacture stuff, and in order to manufacture stuff, they needed two things. They needed a very large workforce that had to be within easy working range, easy enough to be there by 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever, every day. And they also needed a vast number of parts which were produced by other factories, so it behooved everybody to put all these things as close together as possible. And that's how the modern city was born. London was probably the leader of this in terms of the Industrial Revolution, and London in the very early stages of the Industrial Revolution was a special kind of hell. The air was killing people, and the poverty and the prostitution, Jack the Ripper, that whole era. That Dickens wrote about, that was not a fun place to be. Now, the thing is that as more and more of our society becomes information-based and less of it becomes industrial, it's not a question of what the values of the city are. There's no reason for them anymore. They don't have a reason to exist anymore in the way that they used to have a reason to exist. And so this trend is much bigger than Donald Trump, and it's bigger than New York City. Let me rephrase that. There's no longer an economic reason for cities to exist. There's only a social reason. And economics is much more powerful than social reasons, because lots and lots and lots of people left a healthy lifestyle on the farm to go live in cities and deal with all of the problems with the pollution and the disease and the malnutrition and all the rest of it, because that's where the money was. That's where the work was. So if you take the economic incentive for cities away, and that's happening rapidly, then you're only left with the social attraction of cities. And cities can be very attractive in that way. When New York was governed by Republicans, so Giuliani and a little bit of Bloomberg, and New York was not in the top 20 for murders, and it was, and Times Square at 3 in the morning was like Riverwalk. I mean, it was a party. It was just nothing but bright neon. It was wonderful. Then there are some advantages to living in the city. It is a lot of fun to visit, and there are lots of things to do in a small area. And I don't share, but I certainly understand the appeal of living in New York City is probably the prime example. There's no question in my mind that from the 1940s through the 1960s, New York City was the center of the universe. it was just the center of the universe. The entire planet turned around New York City. That whole Mad Men period. And everybody in the streets was wearing suits and ties and hats. All the women were wearing dresses, and everybody was going to work, and New York City was the center of the universe. I like the fact that the things I like about about New York City specifically, as an example of cities, there's tremendous entertainment there. The best thing I've ever seen in my life was Les Miserables on Broadway. I met Natasha in New York for the first time specifically to see that show before it closed, and to show her New York frickin' city, since she had to fly over to come to L.A. anyway. So we spent a couple days in New York before we came out to L.A. And the restaurants are incredible. The food's incredible. It's expensive, but there's a lot of cool stuff to do. The museums are fantastic. Central Park is a wonder. It's a wonder. And there is, without question, a vibe there. There's a sensation, which the best description of that I ever heard was from, oh, come on, Sam Shepard, who turned out to be a pretty good actor, played Chuck Yeager in The Right Stuff, but was actually a playwright, and remarkably good playwright. And Sam Shepard said the first time he went to New York, I guess it was probably in the early 70s, mid 70s, something like that. He said he'd gotten off the bus, he'd just done some mescaline or something, and he had his cowboy boots on. And he said he was walking down the streets of New York City and looked down, and he said he could see sparks coming off of his heels every time he put his foot down. First time I heard that, I said, yeah, I know, that's kind of New York at its best. It's sparks coming off your heels every step you take. Click, click. It's like, holy cow, there's a guy, there's a country boy. Come on, Bill. There's a country boy right back there who went to New York City and found it wasn't everything it was cracked up to be. So there is definitely a social appeal there. But if it turns out that you can't go to the restaurant without being assaulted or harassed by people asking you for money, and if it turns out that you're taking your limousine home through, burning barricades on the street corners, and if it turns out that the stores that you used to shop at are either boarded up or closed because there's no law enforcement, people just coming in and walking out with as many Gucci bags as they can handle, comes a point when you have no reason to be there. You don't need to be there economically, and the only thing that made it worth living in a city would be the kind of things that attract city people. It's happening to every city in America. They're just decaying. There's no economic reason for them anymore. And very rapidly, progressive policies are meaning that there's no social reason for them anymore either. Fisherman's Wharf is closed. Tuscadero, all that stuff in San Francisco, it's just closed. And it's closed because the stores are being looted openly every day by people that Gavin Newsom and George Soros appointed. So, as usual, they're fouling their own campgrounds, and they're making people who love to live in the cities move away. And they're going to places like Nashville and, several other places, rising the property values of those places beyond the means of the people who live there. They're taking basically high-level New York or Los Angeles paying jobs, which they can do from anywhere because of the internet. So they're taking these 6-7-figure jobs into neighborhoods that used to have 5-figure incomes, and they're paying top dollar for houses, and so the price of the houses continue to rise, and to the point where the people who live in Tennessee can't afford to live in Tennessee anymore because of all the New Yorkers and Californians that have come into their city to get away from New York and California. And I would be quite upset about that. The question is, do they change? The prevailing wisdom forever was that immigrants from Los Angeles or California and New York were turning states blue. Jeremy did research with Daily Wire that said, while that may seem sensible, the factual truth is they're actually turning them redder. That the new arrivals from California, for example, in Texas, are more conservative than the Democrats that are in Texas. So, hard to say. That's an interesting point. I was talking about decay, and P7 2017 says, hey, but Whittle, it's not decay. Decay is a natural process. This is programmed destruction. It's an excellent point. Program destruction. Yep. Make the country unlivable, destroy the middle class, live in your walled off, enclosed, highly guarded, highly armed, super elite communities, and then do that. Now I'll close this thing because we got everybody done, and I've still got 2 hours of work to do here. I'm getting very hungry as well. I'll leave you a little bit of good news, and I'll leave this good news from that classic of science fiction, the incredibly deep and monumentally philosophically profound movie called Starship Troopers, which is a joke, obviously. But the big win at the end of Starship Troopers is when the psychic human was dressed up like, who am I thinking of? Heydrich. He's dressed up in his SS uniform because, the military's bad and stuff. We're fighting for our lives, and the military's bad. So anyway, he's got psychic powers, and they capture this giant bug queen, which is coordinating the whole thing, and he puts his hand on there and he does a psychic connection. He goes, "It's afraid! It's afraid!" And everybody cheers. Hooray, we're winning the war because the bug queen on that particular planet is afraid. Well, that bug queen in Starship Troopers is a particularly hideous looking thing, not quite as hideous looking as Klaus Schwab, however. And Klaus Schwab not too long ago said he's afraid. He has said in I don't know if it was an interview or no, I immediately have to suspect anything that comes out of his mouth, because if you cast him as a Bond villain, people would fire you because it was just too on the nose and nobody would believe it. But he says that he is getting worried for the safety of the elites, that the filthy, unwashed masses, for some reason, are not appreciating how much these elites are doing by running our lives for us. And he is saying, I think he said words to the effect of they're coming for us. And my hope is, you know what? I hope he's sincere. I really hope he is genuinely afraid, because that is the one thing that they cannot do. If you make enough people angry, like murderously angry, then they're done. Murderously angry. For example, if the truth of what actually happened in 2020 became widely known what we knew 3 weeks into it, that this virus got out from the Wuhan Weight Loss Center, and if it got out that it was an intentionally deployed bioweapon, and you had tens of millions of deaths on your hands, that might be enough to get people, torch and pitchfork ready. But that's what it's going to take to stop these people. It's going to take the realization that they will not be able to isolate themselves away from the wrath of the people that they're basically murdering. You can hire security and you can have your walled compound, but you can't do much if 80 million people are coming after you with thermal scopes that they use for taking out hogs in Texas at nighttime. There is a level beyond which they are not able to protect themselves. And I hope this is the soft landing, I hope that this is causing them to have some real second thoughts about this. I suspect that's not the case, but you never know. But if he's serious about being afraid, that's definitely a good sign, because the government should be afraid of the people. That's how it should be. That's what's unique about America, and that's why everything has worked. And the reason we're in the trouble we're in now is because the people who are politicians and making policy are not afraid of the people that elected them, and they should be. They should be terrified. And that's where we need to get back to, I think. All right, I'm about done here, I think. 2 hours and 30 minutes, roughly. Minimum viable product. Legally, I could probably get away with that in court of law. All right, so anyway, I think that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, which is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, and you know who you are, and you have our never-ending gratitude as always. So thanks very much for your support, and as usual, And I think we'll say goodnight to our we'll say goodnight to our Twitch people first. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time right here on your very own Stratosphere Lounge. Okay, YouTube, you thought you had a reprieve, but you don't. You're out. You're done. You're out of here. You're finished. You're done. You're dead to me. Okay, we'll see.